Ariana, I'm gonna have to step out real quick, okay?
May I ask why?
Yeah, why? Yeah, why?
Why are you
I'll explain it to you once you step out. Go ahead and step out.
What is the reason for you to search my vehicle?
Hey, can I have your badge number 2?
1973.
All right, bet. Hold on. 1973. What's your name? What's your name?
When I walk back by, you can read it.
All right, say that then. What'd you say yours was?
I already said it was, sir.
Can you repeat yourself, please, sir?
Absolutely. 2043.
2042?
Do you have your ID with you?
Yes, it's in my purse back there.
Boss, you got your ID with you?
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
No, I don't.
You don't? What's your name, man?
Lamarion, baby.
Thank you to everyone watching, and a special thank you to our subscribers. Your support means everything. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. 17 years old, a high school senior on the cusp of adulthood, full of dreams, full of life. 18 years old, a young man far from home, maybe searching for something, maybe running from something. 2 lives just beginning, but in an instant it was over. January 29, 2024. A quiet street in Fort Wayne, Indiana. A parked car, 2 people inside. What happened next was not just an act of violence. It was an execution. Gunfire shattered the stillness of the night. Muzzle flashes, the only brief light in the darkness. The sound, sudden, relentless, deafening, tore through the silence, leaving behind only cold, hollow echoes. Then, nothing. When the police arrived, the sight was unbearable. 2 bodies slumped over, blood pooling onto the seats, the windows shattered from the onslaught of bullets. The coroner would later confirm what was already clear. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't random. Someone wanted Adijah Oke and Lamarion Bailey dead. And whoever pulled that trigger had no intention of leaving them alive. But who would want them dead? And why? A robbery? A mistake? Or was this something else? Something that had been planned? It wouldn't take long for investigators to uncover the truth. A truth buried beneath fear, deception, and betrayal. A truth that led them straight to 2 names. 2 suspects. 2 people who held the answers to that brutal night. And once those answers were revealed, the story would only grow darker. 17 years old, the final stretch of high school, the last months before everything changes. Before the world opens up with possibilities, Adijah Armani Oke was standing at that threshold, ready to take her next steps. A daughter, a friend, a student with ambitions. She had a life filled with promise, with plans, with the future that was hers to shape. Snyder High School had been her world, a place where she walked the halls with confidence, where teachers saw her potential, where classmates knew her name. She had dreams, but those dreams would never be realized. A graduation gown she would never wear, a future she would never reach. And then there was Lamarion Jeremiah Bailey, 18, far from home. From LaGrange, Georgia, to Fort Wayne, Indiana, a journey of over 600 miles. What brought him there? Was it opportunity? Was it escape? Whatever it was, he likely never imagined that this trip would be his last. Lamarion, too, had people who cared about him, a life that mattered. But on the night of January 29, 2024, he was not surrounded by family, not embraced by the people who loved him. He was sitting in a parked car with Adijah, unaware of what was coming. 2 lives, 2 stories. And yet in a single moment, their fates became one. But how did they end up there, on that street, in that car, waiting for what neither of them could have expected? And who made the decision that their lives would end that night? January 29, 2024. A quiet night in Fort Wayne. Just another cold evening, just another car parked on Romey Avenue. Just 2 young people sitting inside, caught in a moment no one thought would be their last. Then, movement. Shadows shifting in the darkness. 2 figures concealed by the night, creeping toward the vehicle. Their presence barely noticeable, Nothing more than silhouettes against the dim glow of a distant streetlight. No rush, no hesitation. Every step calculated, every second bringing them closer. Surveillance cameras captured it. A grainy image. Two figures dressed in dark clothing, faces hidden, the footage silent. But what happened next was deafening. Gunfire. Not a single shot, not two, but an eruption of bullets fired at close range, tearing through the stillness. The glass of the car windows shattered instantly. The sound, sharp, violent, echoed down the empty street, a scene of sudden, merciless destruction. Inside the car, there was no time to react, no time to plead, no time to escape. Adaija Oke and Lamarian Bailey didn't stand a chance. And then, just as quickly as they appeared, the figures vanished. The darkness swallowed them whole. The street fell silent again. The only thing left behind was death. The first to hear the shots, neighbors. Some jolted awake, others frozen in place, unsure of what they'd just heard. A few peered out from their windows, scanning the street, hoping they were wrong. But they weren't. Minutes later, red and blue lights flooded Romy Avenue. Officers arrived, stepping into a crime scene they would never forget. Two young bodies. Lifeless, their final moments stolen in a ruthless attack that left more questions than answers. There were no immediate suspects, no obvious motive. Only the unsettling reality that someone had pulled that trigger with intent. Someone had hunted them down. In the hours after the shooting, detectives worked against time. Two young lives taken, two young lives taken. Two families shattered. A city left searching for answers. The urgency was unmistakable. Who pulled the trigger, and why? The crime scene told part of the story. Bullet casings scattered across the pavement, shattered glass from the car windows, bloodstains marking a moment of irreversible violence. But there were no immediate arrests, no clear suspects, only questions. Then, the calls started coming in. Crime Stoppers tips, whispers from the community. People who had heard something, seen something, or simply wanted to help bring justice. But investigators needed more than rumors. They needed evidence. The surveillance footage was their first lead. The grainy black and white video showed two masked figures approaching the car. The way they moved, stealthy, intentional, suggested this wasn't random. This was a setup, a targeted attack. But masks concealed their faces. The footage alone wasn't enough to name a suspect. Then, one critical breakthrough. A witness. Someone had been there that night. Someone had survived, and that person recognized one of the shooters. The name they gave to detectives was chillingly familiar. D&E K. White. At just 21 years old, White was no stranger to law enforcement. He had a history, a reputation. But now, he wasn't just another name in the system. He was a murder suspect. Still, the pieces weren't complete. One gunman had been identified, but there were two figures in that surveillance footage. And as detectives dug deeper, they uncovered another name. Warone Washington, 17 years old, known on the streets as Wu, a name that had surfaced before in police investigations. But what made this discovery even more shocking was that Washington wasn't walking free. He was already behind bars. Hundreds of miles away, in Alabama, Washington was in custody for an unrelated crime. But investigators soon found reason to believe that his role in the double homicide went beyond just pulling the trigger. They traced phone records. Digital footprints don't disappear. They tell a story, one that can't be erased. And in those records, a pattern emerged. Washington had been in communication with Lamarian Bailey. The messages were subtle but revealing. A meeting had been arranged, a time, a location. And then silence. No more replies from Lamarion. Investigators now had what they needed. One shooter identified. One orchestrator behind bars. But was that the full truth? Or was there still more buried beneath the surface? 2 young lives taken in an instant. Not in a robbery gone wrong. Not in a random act of violence. This was something else. This was calculated, planned. But why? Why would someone set up Adayija Oke and Lamarion Bailey? What could have led to such a deliberate and cold-blooded execution? The details of that night painted a chilling picture. The way the killers approached, concealed by the darkness. The way they opened fire, no hesitation, no words exchanged. The way they left, vanishing into the night, as if they knew exactly what they came to do. This wasn't an argument that escalated. It wasn't a fight that turned deadly. It was an ambush. Detectives knew that, and it meant one thing. It was personal. But personal how? Investigators combed through every possible connection. They searched Adija's phone records, Lamarion's last messages. Who were they in contact with? Who had they seen in the days leading up to the shooting? What they found only deepened the mystery. One of the last names that surfaced was Urane Washington, 17 years old, already sitting in a jail cell in Alabama. But why was he arranging meetings? Why was Lamarion, hundreds of miles from home, meeting with him that night? Theories emerged. Some believed it was a personal dispute, something that had been festering, something that reached a boiling point that night. Others suspected something far more deliberate, a setup. A meeting arranged not in good faith, but as a trap. What was said in those final moments? Did Adayija and Lamarion realize what was happening? Did they have a chance to escape? Or were they caught off guard, thinking they were meeting a friend, only to find themselves surrounded by danger? The truth behind the motive remained just out of reach. The only thing certain was the finality of that night. 2 lives ended in the cold silence of a parked car. 2 families left shattered, grasping for answers. And 2 suspects who, whether out of rage, revenge, or something else entirely, pulled the trigger without mercy. But the investigation wasn't over. And the more detectives uncovered, the more it became clear. There was still more to this story. For months, Adayija Oke and Lamarion Bailey's families had lived in the agonizing space between grief and justice. 2 young lives taken without mercy. 2 futures stolen. And for weeks, there were no answers. No arrests. No arrests. No closure. But justice does not sleep. Detectives worked tirelessly, following every lead, analyzing every frame of surveillance footage and dissecting every message exchanged in the days leading up to the murders. The pressure was mounting and the community demanded justice. Then, in June 2024, a breakthrough. Authorities moved in on DNA White, 21 years old, identified as the gunman, the man who pulled the trigger, ending 2 lives in a matter of seconds. His arrest was not quiet, not peaceful. White was considered armed and dangerous. Law enforcement approached with caution, executing a search warrant with precision. And when they finally had him in custody, the weight of the charges was undeniable. 2 counts of murder. If convicted, he would face up to 150 years in prison. But White wasn't the only one facing justice. Urane Washington, 17 years old, sitting in an Alabama jail on unrelated charges when his name surfaced in connection with the double homicide. Detectives didn't just stumble upon his involvement, they built their case carefully, methodically. Crime Stoppers tips, phone records, digital footprints that painted a clear picture. Washington had arranged the meeting. He had orchestrated the moment that brought Adayija and Lamarion to that car on Romney Avenue. And the moment they arrived, they were walking into a death trap. Washington, already behind bars for another crime, was now facing 2 counts of murder. If convicted, he could serve up to 130 years in prison. Their arrests brought some relief. But for the families of Adayija and Lamarion, relief is not the same as justice. Justice is a trial, a conviction, accountability, and that was still to come. DNA White was scheduled to face a jury in October 2024, a trial that would reveal the full weight of the evidence, a trial that would determine if he spends the rest of his life behind bars. Washington's legal battle was still unfolding. Court dates were pending. His involvement, his role in setting the trap, would be dissected in court, leaving a jury to decide whether he too would be held responsible for the deaths of Adayija, Oki, and Lamarion Bailey. The arrests answered some questions, but they didn't erase the pain. They didn't bring Adayija and Lamarion back. And they didn't explain the most haunting question of all. Why? Fort Wayne was no stranger to tragedy. But this was different. Adayija, Oki, was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a young woman with a future, a life ahead of her. She had walked the halls of Snyder High School with laughter in her voice and dreams in her heart. And now she was gone. Her classmates struggled to comprehend it. Her teachers, who had watched her grow over the years, spoke of a student who was bright, full of potential. A life taken too soon. And so, the school honored her the only way they could. A memorial was placed in the school's main hallway. Flowers, photographs, handwritten notes from friends who wished they had one last moment to say goodbye. A candlelight vigil was held, where hundreds gathered in silence, holding flickering flames against the cold night air. Some whispered prayers. Others stood quietly, their grief too heavy for words. But the pain didn't end there. Lamarion Bailey's family was left to grieve from hundreds of miles away in LaGrange, Georgia. A son who would never come home. A family forced to bury him without answers. His mother spoke at his funeral, her voice breaking as she described the child she had raised, the young man she had been so proud of. "My baby didn't deserve this," she cried, surrounded by family and friends. 2 lives ended, 2 families shattered, and a community left to ask the hardest questions. Why? What led to this? What could have been done to stop it? The tragedy cut deep, a stark reminder of how quickly violence can steal a future, how suddenly a life can be reduced to a headline. Fort Wayne grieved, and they waited for justice. For Adayija's family, for Lamarion's loved ones, the trials ahead meant facing the pain all over again. Sitting in a courtroom, hearing the details of how their children's final moments unfolded, watching the people accused of taking their lives fight for their own freedom. And there was one question lingering over it all. Will justice be served?